that my friend and fellow poet and educator and I dreamt up after reading it, just like we would do this, and the humanities bookmark in you or behind us in this. So we thank you for being here and thank them for helping us make this possible. I want to say that you saw something familiar in the title of this event. You probably, if you're here, you love poetry, and probably love Mari and Etheridge as much as we do. Etheridge said while he was in jail, poetry and the few people that wanted to stay human saved him. Mari Evans said when she wrote poetry, she was trying to retrieve what it meant to be human on the page, which is where we get the name of this event from. So these poets are so special. I think all of us that are here are still involved, kind of teachers, or as students maybe of the work, I should say. We're grateful to be here. We're grateful to have you here.
Hi everyone, my name is Chantel Massey, and yes, I'm very excited about this. Really hope that you will engage a lot today, so stay for as long as you can during the panel, as well as the workshops, and then the readings, which will be involving some amazing local poets who their legacy has impacted. And we also hope to influence with this recording, with this opportunity to influence and encourage younger poets to continue to persist as well by knowing that there's a legacy here, and there's a community here that supports them. And I'm just grateful and excited to get this started. And thank you all again for being here. Yeah.
Like I said, I'm also a guy that just likes to talk about the microphones and not introduce himself also. My name is Mitchell L.H. I'm a poet and a professor at IUPUI. And I should say that one of the first events I went to was a reading in honor of Etheridge at the Chatterbox. So we're just like going full circle right now. This morning panel will gather fellow poets and scholars talking about their work in kind of working the legacy of Mari Etheridge. I would like to introduce our moderator, Dr. Onsana Kazembe, one of my colleagues from IUPUI. And after I introduce Dr. Kazembe, he will take the floor for the panel. Onsana D. Kazembe is an assistant professor at University of Indianapolis, teaches in the School of Education and in the IUPUI Africana Studies program. He's a poet, educator, and critical Black scholar focusing on urban education, culture, race, and arts, learning, and pedagogy. He pursues a research program that interrogates the aesthetics, ontological thrust, institutional development, and literary genealogy of African diasporas, Black radical movements, and the Black intellectual tradition. A poet, spoken word artist, Dr. Kazembe performed at colleges and universities throughout the U.S. and in Canada and Africa. As teaching artist, he has developed and facilitated creative writing programs within youth detention centers, prisons, community centers, K-12 schools, and other learning spaces. Dr. Kazembe's most recent career project, Voodoo of Hell's Half Acre, The Traveling Genius of Richard Wright, a blues poetry opera, is a poetic meditation on the art, life, and legacy of world-renowned author Richard Wright. Dr. Kazembe's latest edited book, Keeping Peace, Reflections of Life, Legacy, Commitment, and Struggle, was published by Third World Press, the great Third World Press from Chicago. Craig also serves as executive director of the Third World Press Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Testing. Testing. Check 1, 2. Thank you very much. Okay. Good Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am thrilled, pleased as punch to be here in conversation with you. All artistic topics and issues are important. So we have a very esteemed panel joining us today. I'll share some brief observations, brief notes from their bios, and then we will get into what I hope will be a really, really wonderful conversation with you. Hopefully, with all of this brain power and this cultural, artistic power up here, we'll have enough sandwiches for an intellectual picnic. So we can hope for that. So, originally hailing from the mean streets of Richmond, California, right? Dr. Terry Jett is professor of political science and peace and conflict studies department and special assistant to the provost for diversity and inclusivity at Butler University. Dr. Jett is also affiliate faculty member of the Race, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program, the Peace and Conflict Studies program for the Butler University Hub for Black Affairs and Community Engagement, and Senior Advisor to the President. Dr. Jett's research interests in writings focus primarily around post-civil rights era community and economic development, as well as empowering pedagogical practices that create inclusive curricula and co-curricular spaces. Her book, Fighting for Farming Justice, Diversity, Food Access in the USDA, was published last year, 2020. Dr. Jett is currently working on another book entitled Talking About Race, James Baldwin and Margaret Mead, Then and Now. Looking forward to that. Tabitha Barber is a creative entrepreneur here in Indianapolis. She has a variety of passions and interests, including event management, culinary arts, writing, fashion, and beauty, and vlogging. Tabitha published an essay in Apex magazine in 2019 reflecting on the impact of Mari Evans' literary work and community leadership that was titled The Art of Peace, Mari Evans' Legacy of Peaceful and Ethical Engagement. Ms. Barber's work and public scholarship are geared toward preserving the history of Mari Evans through recording the stories of those who knew her best and supporting the continuation of public discourse on her work. Norman Minnick, his collections of poetry include To Taste the Water, Volley, and a chapbook entitled Advice for a Young Poet. We need that today. Dr. Minnick is the editor of Between Water and Song, New Poets for the 21st Century, and the Indianapolis Anthology. Dr. Minnick is a freelance designer and adjunct professor of literature and writing at IUPUI, Marian University, and the University of Indianapolis. And last but certainly not least, we have Hanako Davia, project manager of the Etheridge Knight Partnership Initiative, assistant director of the Center for Citizenship and Community at Butler University, and probably the most, I think, high-profile crown jewel in your CV, that she's the great niece of Etheridge Knight. So, at 1 degree of separation, please give this panel a warm round of applause and welcome. I was really thinking about family, and I was thinking about connections and degrees of separation, degrees of connection. That is, Mari Evans made her transition to the ancestral realm the spring before I arrived in Indianapolis. I'm from Chicago, and so I got here in the fall of 2017. However, I met Mari Evans, and I worked for the past 12 years with Third World Press in Chicago with Professor Haki Madhubuti. I'm now serving as the executive director of Third World Press Foundation. And I met Mari Evans at a dinner that we hosted at the press for her, Nikki Giovanni, Lerone Bennett Jr., Sonia Sanchez. There was a whole bunch of gangsters in the house that night. So that was in, I think, 2013 or 2014. That was my first time meeting her. She had actually drove up to Chicago that day. So before we get into the conversation and the questions that I have for these esteemed panelists, I'd like to maybe go down the line, and maybe each of you could provide a brief sort of narrative around your connection to either Mari Evans or Edward Knight. That way we can start this out with a really personal and personalized kind of meditation on their work, their art, their legacy. We can start with Professor Minnick.
Okay, well, let's see. I met Mari. I was running the Visiting Writers Series at Butler, and we had her come speak at, I think it was 2000, what did I put in the thing, 3 or 4? 2003, I think. And then shortly after that was the, and again, you'll have to correct me on the years, I think it was 04, the airport poems, the poems at the airport. Which was that 04, I think? I can't remember. But the artist, Martin Donald from England, was the artist who was going to put the poems in the etched glass in the airport. And there was a contest, but they really wanted Mari's poem celebration, and Mari, had originally declined. This was, through the Writing Center was the partner here, and they really wanted the poem. So they reached out to me because, I had, worked with Mari, a few other stuff. So they reached out to me and asked if I would go and talk her into it, And so I did, and eventually she was comfortable enough to invite Martin into her house, which is a big thing, for Mari. So he came over and, went through the whole project with her, and so I kind of became her unofficial agent throughout that whole thing. All I was supposed to do was talk her into it, but somehow I was driving her up to the architects, to go to meetings. I was driving, making sure she ate. I realized one day driving her that she hadn't eaten that day. I'm like, what? So I was kind of looking out for her. And by the way, she wanted to go to McDonald's, and through the drive-thru, she ordered a hamburger with no pickles. That was it. That's all she ate. I'm like, I couldn't imagine. That's a teaser to me. So we had a good laugh about that. I never met Etheridge, although, I came to Indianapolis for undergrad in '96, so he'd been gone for a few years, but, fell under the wing of some of his friends and so forth who introduced me to his work, and then I started to attend Robert Bly's conference on the Great Mother and the New Father. That was my yearly trip, and he was a regular there. So there I met Elizabeth McKim, who was his former partner and literary executor, and we became close friends. So I feel like we are kindred spirits, even though we never actually met. All right, we'll pass it down.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, first I'd like to thank Professor Mitchell L.H and Chantel Massey for their organizing work of this event and Indiana Humanities. I'm delighted to be here with you today. My name is Tabitha Barber. I'm a creative entrepreneur, a lot of interests as our moderator read, but my connection to this panel is that I'm a writer and a scholar of Marianne's work. I received a grant from the Indiana Arts Commission in 2019 to study Mari Evans, work through her collection, and to write an essay, and co-lead a workshop with Chantel Massey, which was fantastic. We held it virtually in April of 2020. And a really important part of that research was getting to know and recording the stories of people who knew Mari Evans best. So I'm really delighted to hear some of the stories that have been shared thus far. I would say that my interest in Mari Evans grew when I was an undergraduate at Butler University. Very excited to be on the panel with my professor, Dr. Terry Jett. I was taking a class under Professor Horton when I was first introduced to Mari Evans, and we read I Am a Black Woman. And it was the first time in my life that I felt my blackness and my womanness reflected back to me. And I when I engage with Maria's work, I recall a writing by Sonia Sanchez where she says, I'm going to hold young people's heads in my hands and slowly turn them. And that's the kind of like mind molding and teaching and loving care that I experience when I read Marian's work. It was an important time in my life where I went to a predominantly white institution and was sort of struggling with all of these issues of blackness and gender and identity. And it's amazing how such a prolific writer and such a prolific reader can sort of stand in the gap for you. So I'm really excited to be here. Of course, I published an essay on her work talking about the ways in which artists and community leaders can best engage with community. So I look forward to sharing more, and I'll pass it over to you.
Hello? Okay, it works. Hello, everybody. My name is Hanako Gabia. I am the great niece of F.H. Knight. I also work at Butler University. So I'm lucky enough that my work kind of ended up coinciding with my uncle, Uncle Junior. We all call him Uncle Junior at home, but I was unfortunate. I was born soon before he passed, so I was born in 1990, October of 1990, crashed in March of 1991, so I didn't really get to know him personally, but throughout my life I had heard stories about him. Our family's really big on the creative arts. My sister was always been a writer and a poet, so it's always come up in conversations of being like, oh, well, your uncle was a poet. He like wrote things. A lot of people liked it. We don't really like his poetry. It doesn't rhyme. his mother's was better. My great grandma was like, her poetry is so much better. It rhymes. She's like said it in church. It's so much better. So that's kind of, so I had learned about him a lot through my family stories about him, seeing him and my grandfather would talk about him, my great aunts would talk about him. He was a big influence too to my uncles. And then my mother also had a very good relationship with him as well. She was able to meet when the CDLC opened, the Center for Black Literature and Culture opened, and we had that, there was a celebration. Our family was asked to be there to represent the Knight family, and there was a huge poster of him, and that was the first time I was like, oh, he's actually a big deal. But just seeing him and hearing about him, the stories about him when I was young, how he liked to bother my grandfather, being his little brother, and how my uncles kind of learned from him how to mess with their father. And then through this project I've had with Butler University, going through the archives, I've learned more about him and my family, and that legacy of the Black culture in Indianapolis, kind of confirming things that I've known and heard from my family, and able to bring that to students working on the project as well. So that, and I'm working right now on I'm in a master's degree program at Butler, working on a thesis, and it's surrounded by, my thesis topic is specifically on the project I'm working on. So kind of everything's kind of come, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be able to like connect my family legacy, the culture of Indianapolis, and my work all in one place. So, thank you.
All right, good afternoon. I actually prepared some remarks, so if you will indulge me, that's what I do. First of all, thank you to Professor Mitchell L.H and the wonderful artist Chantel Massey for their creativity and brilliance that has led us to spend this time together honoring two artists whose words give me strength at a moment in time of which I can only describe as sustained grief. I keep hearing about a divide in this country, the United States of America, two sides. One side wants BIPOC intersectional people to be complacent and silent in the face of a hyper-capitalist, white supremacist, patriarchal system, as Bell Hooks describes it, that is literally trying to kill us. The other side is the right side. Which brings me to my brief remarks focused primarily on Mari Evans, because I had a moment with her that meant everything to me. I was introduced to her poetry as a child along with the works of Langston Hughes, Sonia Sanchez, Gwendolyn Brooks, and others. When you are a black child from a black neighborhood in Richmond, California, and you are being bused to a predominantly white elementary school so that you can get a decent education, not provided by the one called Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary that is right in your own neighborhood, you have to be equipped for the daily intellectual and emotional assault that will likely come your way. Rarely physical, because at least in that respect, they knew better. So my parents provided me the armor of these words of Mari Evans. Who can be born black and not sing the wonder of it, the joy, the challenge, and to come together in a coming togetherness, vibrating with the fires of pure knowing, reeling with power, ringing with the sound above sound above sound, to explode in the majesty of our oneness, our coming together in a coming togetherness. Who can be born black and not result? So imagine my joy when I landed a faculty position in the political science department of Butler University here in Indianapolis and discovered that I was in the same city as my beloved poet, Mari Evans. I never paid attention to where she lived, but when I learned she lived here, I knew I would be all right. Early in my faculty career, I taught a first-year seminar for a core curriculum called Assessing the American Dream Through the Lens of Black Women. At the time, due to the manner that incoming first-year students would select their first-year seminar class, meaning that those who registered early on in the process got their first choices, my class was always the last one to fill up. If you know anything about Butler University, you know why. In the chapter in her book, Clarity as Concept, A Poet's Perspective, published in 2006, in this chapter called Where We Live, The Importance of Ethos to Creativity, Mari Evans wrote, quote, "Many years ago, I lived in a historic black community in a section of Indianapolis so close to the heart of town, I could walk there in less than 15 minutes. The community no longer exists, and that is also part of what I need to say here. Many years ago, my father, who had briefly encountered Butler University in what fashion I never knew, said quietly that he hated Butler, and said it with a passion I could not understand, for I had no notion that he knew Butler University. Why? I questioned. It's racist, he muttered flatly. Oh, I said, and that was that. We had affirmed its subliminal understanding. I never learned the details, but I suppose it had to do with employment he sought there. Years later, I understood that as a black community opinion, not just his, end quote. The last students to register for that first year seminar who occupied my class were some very happy black students and some really pissed off white students. That was the divide. I proceeded accordingly. I assigned Mari Evans' book of political essays, and through my friend Vicki Daniel, who was close to her, she actually agreed to come to my class and talk about her book. We sat in a circle with her. She read, the students asked questions, she answered every question in a manner that affirmed each and every one of them. And it changed us as a class from that moment on. We were bonded. Her presence meant the world to them and to me. This is what college was all about. And in her, black and white, they recognized genius, and they and I were inspired. After that, we went to lunch at the Indiana State Museum. Just me, her, and Vicki, who had picked her up and brought her to my class. It was close to this time of year, so they had a replica of the Ellis Ayres tea room style restaurant, which was where Miss Evans wanted to go. And then she went home, leaving an indelible mark in my heart and my mind. And if you haven't read her book, her political essays and Clarity as Concept, or even if you have, this is a good moment to revisit what she says. And I'll read a couple things from the preface. Quote, I think of myself as a political writer whose responsibility as a writer is not only to call the people to view the nature of their oppression in a manner that clarifies details that have become obscure because they are so familiar, not only to identify the oppressor, but to point out how in bed we are with the oppressor, in as much as we have become a materialistically committed people, and our sense of self has been subsumed by having the undeniably good fortune to reside in the wealthiest, most powerful country in the world. And later, in these essays, I have tried to examine what I see as the confused notions African Americans hold about our participation or lack of participation in the systems of the society. The veil between who we are in this country and who we think we are is so thick that when someone suggests, as I do, that we are a colonized people, that given the level of our delusion and the extent of our satisfaction, despite the litany of political, economic, and social ills that have made us subordinate and dependent upon handouts and false smiles, we find it impossible to set to one side the image we have cherished of ourselves and confront our difficult, dehumanizing reality.
All right. Thank you, panelists, for that. I wanted to throw this out and get responses from folks. And this is when we examine the work of Maria, as the body of work, the corpus. You see these themes emerge, right? These themes around the importance of art, the function of art to awaken consciousness, the function of art to allow or enable people to really understand the nature of their oppression, especially Black folk. And then I think most importantly, one of the themes that emerges is this impulse that we have to, beyond everything else, we have to love ourselves, right? And so I was wondering if the panelists can respond to those themes, those particular themes, as you interface with them in the work of Mari Evans. Whoever would like to jump in here. Remember, we got to make some intellectual sandwich.
I'll jump in that. Absolutely. Her work really, and I knew why my parents were introducing her to me, because they wanted me to have a firm foundation. And that's what her work and those of the others that I mentioned that were part of this collective Black arts movement emerging kind of post-civil rights and the Black Power movement around that time, really recognized that we needed to have a critical lens to understand our own identity and our consciousness about the way that we kind of operate and walk through life, particularly in this country, but also to equip us to recognize ourselves within a diaspora, if you will. And so the work is so poetic, but it spoke to me, and I guess I would say it's probably why I'm a political scientist, because so much of that type of work really resonated with me and my own experiences. And actually I have a degree in ethnic studies, which I married with the discipline of political science, and I think it's because of that. But Mari was so fascinating to me because she had such a sort of a gentle spirit, but the words that she put down on paper were just powerful and just really kind of so radical in a way that she wrote. And also her work is prophetic because it's still very relevant. And preparing for this, I really, just in this moment, really felt thankful to have her voice to rely on, to give me some sanctuary.
Anyone else? I think Professor Douglas is hoping for good trouble, so let's answer this.
Most definitely, I would agree. Art, oppression, history are certainly themes of Mari Evans' work. I think when I think about I Am a Black Woman, certainly in her most famous work in the poem itself, written published in 1970 with references to the Vietnam War, with references to slavery and sort of life as a Black woman and the things that you carry with you, both past, present, future. In the way that she says that, I'm a Black woman, I'm tall as a cypress, I'm indestructible. And those words resonated with me in my experience because I feel as a Black woman, those things remain true, all the things that you grow up with, the current moment, living through the pandemic and, living through the Black Lives Matter movement and all of these injustices towards Black people. Those things just don't roll over you. You hold them and they become a part of you. I think back to when I was growing up, one really formidable moment for me was the murder of Trayvon Martin. And it's something that I still carry with me because Trayvon Martin and I would have been the same age. And when I think about my Black experience and Black oppression, I can't help but think about him. I can't help but think about the rise of this Black Lives Matter movement that we're still in today and working through. And that's why I think that Mari Evans' work is so powerful, because she was able to not only capture a moment when this work was written, but it just has this what feels like an internal resonance throughout time, that you can pick this up and sort of see yourself in it. You can see the moment, you can learn the history, and you can see how it continues to apply.
Thank you for that. Any others? I should move on. Okay. I had another question to throw to the panel. This is a question about process. Okay. I've read Richard Wright's 1937 essay over and over again, Blueprint for Negro Writing. And I've heard him talk about the fact that writing is such a solitary business, right? I've heard Langston Hughes, or read Langston Hughes write about that. Edwidge Danticat wrote about that. We did Thorough Press, we had a Zoom birthday party for Sonia Sanchez, and we were on just vibing, just chilling and talking. Boogie Wationgo was on the call with us. And we swung around to this issue around art and being such a solitary kind of process. So with Etheridge Knight, his poetry explored these dialectical, he had to wrestle with that also, the loneliness and the empty cave. So he's exploring these dialectical themes such as suffering and survival, trial and tribute, loss and love, freedom and bondage, right? These things, as well as like our own personal contradictions that we bring to the work that we do, and also our striving. That's what made his work so uniquely and quintessentially human. So these are things that everyone struggles against in their own way, struggles with and against. What is in your response? In your view, what is your response to that? Just sort of the artist's struggle, the loneliness or the solitariness of creation, of writing. And how do you respond to that? How do you interface with that theme as you encounter it in the work of these two giants, and even in your own work? Maybe okay.
So what I've kind of looked at a lot, and what my students kind of found in the archive, learning about Etheridge Knight, one student in particular, Chris Strong, she looked at community and poetry. For her, she was also a writer. She liked to write poetry, and she's always seen art and poetry as something that's very much solitary, something that you do by yourself, that's just you and the page. From learning about Etheridge Knight, and then also my own studies for my thesis paper, when you think about poetry and community poetry, especially spoken word, that is very much a communal aspect that kind of helps to release some of that solitude and loneliness. It's something that once the poet writes or speaks it out loud, then you have the audience sharing in that experience, and it becomes not just the poets, but the community. So that's one way of just sharing your work, having conversations about that work, is a way for it to become, I think, less of a solitude aspect, less of something that makes you go alone, can get inside your head, but bring it out into the community and make it a communal experience. Like sharing your own solitude, sharing your own joys and struggles, relating to others through your work.
Anyone else care to take that back a minute?
I'm going to be kind of careless in paraphrasing this, but he did write about what you were saying there. He saw it in 3 parts. This, please correct me if you were, but the first part was the writer sitting, down writing, and then the next part was the poem on the page, and then the next part, which was probably the most important, was the poem being spoken. Is that?
His like quote that we have too for our project is like, the poetry is the poet, the poem, and the people.
That's it. Thank you. I should have just. Say that again. The poet.
The poet, the poem, and the people.
Yeah. Okay, that's nice. Yeah, I always loved. And if you ever listen to, by the way, you can, if you go to there's a site, Penn State, I think, has tons and tons and tons of audio of him reading poems, and there's different years on there, so you can listen to him reading a poem and then listen to him saying the same poem. And he would call it saying poems. I'm going to say you a poem. I always love that, and I adopted that, and I use that in my classes. I still to this day, I'm old-fashioned enough that I make my students memorize and recite poems, and that whole idea of bringing poems alive, bringing them off the page into the body, and so forth is very important to my work. I love that he called it saying poems.
Another question. This is about the Black Arts Movement. Okay, one of my primary research area is examining, researching the evolution of 20th century global Black arts movements, plural. And there's 6 of them that I research and study in my work. But I want to talk about the Black arts movement for a minute here. And as BAM flourished, and we all give credit to the godfather architect, the late Amiri Baraka, peace be upon him. But as BAM, the Black arts movement flourished with New York City being ground zero, and it evolved, you began to see its propagation in all of these U.S. cities. There's a southeastern component, there's a Midwest component, there's a Western U.S. component, etc. There's even a UK component, a strand. And what you're seeing in this art that emerged is these artists responding to particular push and pull issues, themes, histories, contested tensions in their own locales. But also you can draw some connections between what they were dealing with. So you see, for example, in Chicago, Gwendolyn Brooks, people like Mari Evans speaking with the Chicago tongue. You go out on the West Coast, you see people like Askia Toure speaking with that Western U.S. tongue. You go out, of course, on the East Coast, poets like Larry Neal, speaking with the New York tongue. So here in the Midwest, Etheridge and Mari Evans, Etheridge Knight and Mari Evans were speaking with the Midwest tongue, right? So there's some particular sort of thematic distinctions, some themes that sort of were fleshed out in their work, generally speaking, as Midwest representatives of BAM. So can you, this panel, can you respond to what you have explored, with some of those themes that you've encountered in their work, as you've read and sort of encountered their work, and maybe even your own work, some of the particular things that are sort of fleshed out in this Midwestern context in which you all, like Mari Evans and Etheridge Knight, also flourish and are developing as artists. Anyone care to take that on? I tell you, we're trying to do an intellectual picnic here now. So,
I've been here 20 years. I saw myself as a Midwestern.
or even not so much as a Midwesterner per se, but as a person whose work happens in this context?
I guess I would say I don't see huge distinctions regionally. I feel more of a collective consciousness kind of across time and space. And also I want to kind of go back also to this notion of the tradition of writing, because there's a book called Black Ink that I have turned to that talks about the kind of Black intellectual tradition of the written expression, because so much of our culture generally has been cast as being oral and not seen as being a part of this sort of philosophical tradition that is more anchored in the written word. And I think that this collective consciousness, that Black people in particular have to rely upon, requires a certain level of solitude to reflect and process the everyday things that we experience. And I would say, if I were to look at my experience growing up in California, and compare it to what I'm experiencing, I guess, as an adult in the Midwest, in Indiana in particular. And also I spent some time in Alabama. That's where I went to graduate school. And so each place has equipped me differently in order to remain my authentic self, regardless of where I am kind of speaking or engaging. And I think that is critical for, most Black artists, I would say. I consider myself an artist, per se. I wish I could. I feel I have some aspects of creativity that shape the way that I do things, but thinking about it kind of from that sort of multiple realms, I believe the Black arts movement generally kind of speaks to all of that. And also because it is so particularly political, it speaks to the political and economic dynamics that we have to confront everywhere that we are. There's not, unfortunately, a safe space within this country, and I would argue, I don't know globally, I haven't been to one yet. I've been in several places globally, where where you can't forget that you are Black, just put it that way. Constant reminders of that and what that means and represents in different spaces. So being able to understand that fully in all its completeness and authenticity and as a gift allows you to continue to move forward and to remain grounded in whatever work it is that you do. So I guess hopefully I answered some of what you're saying. I'm sort of thinking about it in a lot of different ways.
I think you inspired some responses. No? I was going to just tell a story, but it's going to be off track, so.
I really found the question to be really interesting if there were themes of the Midwest in Marianne's work. Certainly seeing a struggle, a love and a disdain for Indianapolis and Indiana as a whole is very clear, particularly in our writing, but also in our community leadership, being very vocal about the development of I-65 and being particularly vocal about the development of IUPUI and how that displaced communities, but particularly Black communities. So that is certainly a topic of our work and conversations I've had with some of our close some of her close friends, it seems that Mari Evans had a struggle with Indianapolis culturally, but worked through that in building and maintaining community and relationship with one another, with others, checking in to make sure that people were okay through the celebration of Kwanzaa. A lot of people tell stories about how celebrating Kwanzaa at her house with her was so special. But I do think that in her work, particularly clearly as a concept, she writes about how in Indianapolis and in Indiana, there was no space to preserve Black writing and Black history. And of course now we have a Center for Black Literature and Culture, which is amazing. But during that time, I think there was a struggle with the Midwest, Indianapolis, Indiana, and having those cultural hubs and spaces like you see in other parts, like you see in Detroit or like you see in Chicago.
This is not the story I was going to tell, but I'm going to reveal a thread, I think, between what you just said and what Dr. Jett said. Remember, she read the passage from the essays about her, what she knew about Butler, And so when we had her read in 03, she initially said no to that as well. And there was a big issue. I credit Frank Quinn and Susan Neville for really, working with her. They also were responsible for getting the library to purchase Etheridge's papers for the collection. And all that was sort of done to sort of, have a part in healing some of those old wounds. A little side note, I remember once writing to ask the great poet Lucille Clifton if she would come read it Butler Visiting Writer Series. And let me just say that even back then we were very well endowed. We paid handsomely, so it's very hard to turn down. Lucille Clifton wrote back with what I think was the most brilliant response I ever got, and it simply said, thank you for your invite, but I never have and never will want to read at Butler University, period. And I was like, that is so cool. I didn't know, she didn't say why. She didn't have to say why, we all knew. But I was like, I was upset that she didn't come, but part of me was like, that's awesome. So anyway, having Mari come, so when she finally agreed, and that was a huge step for us. Because once that happened, I feel like the community, seeing that, started, because like you said, back then, it wasn't a long time ago, it didn't seem that long ago to me, but back then we didn't have some of these, organizations that you're talking about, and she would be very, very pleased. So anyway, that was just a little anecdote of the struggles we went through, even in 03,
I think we only have a few minutes left in this segment, so I wanted to throw this last prompt out. The German philosopher Theodor Adorno once wrote that the condition of suffering is to allow truth to speak. Now, everyone up here is a poet. I think of poet as an acronym, purveyor of expression and truth. So I wanted to throw this prompt out, and maybe we get a response from everyone, starting with Dr. Jett and coming this way. Etheridge Knight wrote back in 1989, he said that the more oppressive the system you live under, the louder the poets scream. That's your prompt. So if you could provide a brief response to that prompt from the great Etheridge Knight, I think that will provide a wonderful close to this great segment. Etheridge Knight, he wrote that the more oppressive the system you live under, the louder the poets scream. How do you respond to that?
Oh yeah, that's amazing. And in that regard, I can require a response. They put you to speak out and to be a vehicle for your community. It's their words are empowering. So yeah, I firmly agree with that. And a poet's voice is always both inviting and beautiful at the same time. And so it resonates beyond the audience that which the poet has intended. I do want to read one thing real quick, though, and it's a footnote to what I read earlier from Mari's book, where she's talking about what her dad said about Butler, and she said that on this footnote, Butler has taken beginning steps toward revising its image. It bought the Edward Knight papers for its rare book collection, and under its last two presidents, it has become the city's major podium for African American writers and lecturers. In 2004, it invited Evans to deliver one of its two commencement addresses and presented her with the L.H. degree. So that was amazing commencement.
Can you repeat the quote again?
The more oppressive the system you live under, the louder poets speak.
I think for poets in general, I wouldn't call myself a poet. I am more into the visual arts, and I do it for myself for reflection, rather than sharing my art with other people. But I've always been impressed that one of the big things about my uncle and his work, especially now diving in deep into it, is his ability to capture raw emotion through his words and his voice. It's like something that especially the students picked out, like when students that were working very closely with the archives and other students that we had that were trying to introduce the legacy of Etheridge Knight in the classrooms at Butler, they very much could understand that even if they didn't have the same experience, they could feel the same emotions, they had the same emotions just by reading his words. And so as things I think push down, those words become more powerful. It's something that other people relate to, so it feels louder. And also you just also experience it. The more oppressive the system, the more people experience that system. And then you can hear the voices echoing louder and louder. I just recently took a plane trip to Florida, and I told my sister and my friend that I become super radicalized whenever I'm on a plane. And notice all the disparities and want to start a revolution and be like, class equality, everyone needs arm rests, but realize that's like the worst place to do that. But because of, especially during, I think, with COVID restrictions too, it becomes so oppressive that you notice all of those things. And then those voices, those things that you read, things that you heard echo in your mind and in your heart, and you can relate to that.
Absolutely, and I think that we still hear the echoes and the reverberations, the vibrations of both of these giants, Etheridge Knight and Mari Evans today. I think particularly for Mari Evans, just being a part of this Black arts movement, of course, was a collective strain, but also just when we look personally at her work as a poet, as an essayist. She was also a jazz musician. She was also a children's literary writer, and she was a community leader, and just very, relentless and engaged to the end of her life. And so I'm grateful to have experienced her through her work and through those that knew her.
Okay, first of all, honey, you better write a poem. Whenever I'm in a plane, I want to start a revolution. That is a time for a poem. If you don't do it, I'll want it. Whenever I'm on a plane, I want to start a revolution. That's awesome. It's already working out. This is all great. I'm thinking about too something about Etheridge that I think what most people respond to is the feeling, right? The real deep, painful, soulful Wendy, whatever word you want to apply to it, this sort of feeling that's coming up from the gut, you know, and he's one of the few poets who I can hear the poems, you know, hundreds of times and still tear up. Very few poets do that to me. Mostly because I'm a man and you don't cry. Just kidding. No, but you know, there's idea of ancestry, of course, but feeling fucked up. You know, this is a poem that a lot of people dismiss because, oh, it's just, it's just a gratuitous use of the word, the F word. No. You know, this shows real pain, and if you've never really, hurt from losing someone that you truly, you wouldn't understand that poem. And so, my students love it because they get to say fuck a lot. But the ones who truly, lost someone, they really get it, and that's another poem that I think is just so powerful. I don't know how else to explain it, but there's a sort of a trend in creative writing right now that you don't want to use too much emotion because, you don't want it to become too sentimental, you don't want it to become abstract or too, soft is the word, cushy or whatever, but I think, those are good examples of ways you can really have emotion in the poem. There's one more thing I'd like to say about Etheridge and Mari that's not usually talked about. They're both tricksters. They're very much the tricksters. In her poem, The Rebel, which was presented so wonderfully at her funeral, which was a great idea, where she's, do you mind if I read it? I mean, we have time? I had it marked. That's page 21. It's real short. The Rebel. When I die, I'm sure I will have a big funeral. Curiosity seekers coming to see if I am really dead, or just trying to make trouble. And it was a big funeral, and a lot of us were wondering, or were hoping that she was just making trouble. And she's still making trouble. So that's...
Thank you. Dr. Terry Jett, Hanukkah Ogalia, Ms. Tabitha Barber, and Professor Minnick. You're not going to let me clap by myself, right?
I just wanted to, if you guys are curious about what we are doing at Butler University, most of the issues are really done by our student workers that have been working on the project, so shout out to them. Chris Strong, Dakota Love, Nate Lemon, and Scholar Jim Borough. But we have a Facebook page that's managed by Scholar, Facebook and Instagram page, so you can follow what we're doing and all the fun things we're trying to do in the city at EK Free People Speed. So please follow that, and you can kind of see all the initiatives we're trying to do. We're trying to do some workshops and get FH's name out into the community more. So thank you.
Thank you. Can we give it up for you one more time, please? I could be better than that. Thank you all again for being here. We hope to, in spirit of the last remark, apart from the announcement, we hope that you will leave here inspired by the legacy of making trouble for your community. And that's how she's making trouble. She's making troublemakers in myself and all the rest of us by continuing to push Indianapolis to be better and have these conversations. And so we hope that you really engage in conversation while you're here. And before we go into our next part, we're going to take a brief intermission. And then we're going to go to that back part back there for the workshops. But thank you again, and